Good evening, everybody. Our honorable lecturer tonight is Maestro Murry Sidlin, who is the founder and president of the Defiant Requiem Foundation, and he will talk about this wonderful and important commemoration project. Before we start, technical details, you are all muted, but you can write your questions and remarks at the chat on the side. And at the end of the lecture, we will ask the questions and you will be able to get answers. For those of you who did not yet watch the movie, you can see now at the chat the link for the movie. So thank you, Murry, for joining us, and thank you for giving us this lecture. And the stage is yours.
Thank you.
Ich wandre durch Terezin-Stadt, das Herz so schwer wie Blei, bis je mein Weg kein Ende hat, bis je mein Weg kein Ende hat, dort knapp an der Bastei, dort knapp an der Bastei, dort bleib ich auf der Brücke stehen und schau ins Tal hinaus. Ich möchte so gerne weitergehen, ich möchte so gerne weitergehen, ich möchte so gerne nach Haus, ich möchte so gerne nach Haus. Nach Haus, du wunderbares Wort, du machst das Herz mir schwer. Man nahm mir mein Zuhause fort, man nahm mir mein Zuhause fort. Nun hab ich keines mehr, nun hab ich keines mehr.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. That was the music of Ilse Weber, who I think is the only woman composer in Terezin, and her short and beautiful Schubertian masterpiece, I Wander Through Theresienstadt. So let me tell you a little bit about my probing of planet Terezin, a world unto itself, and the intertwining of the cultural miracles with the more common state of insanity and chaos. In the early spring of 2012, my colleague Mark Rulison and I traveled to Jerusalem to meet with the producers of the Israel Festival. Mark is the general manager of the Defiant Requiem Foundation, and he also guides all the tech for each of our performances, lectures, screenings, and all the other events as well. So we were having dinner in a rather rustic Italian restaurant near our hotel, and we were discussing the conference we would be having with the producers, the personnel managers, the venue managers, and the others the next morning. At a small table just next to ours sat a man and his laptop. Now, it used to be able to say there was a man and his dog. That's gone now. It's a man and his laptop. That's what we have in today's world. By the time our food arrived, we had essentially finished our preparatory conversation, and the man next to us turned his chair and without an invitation joined us at our table. He said, as I recall, "I've been listening to you both. What is this all about?" He seemed innocently curious and calm, so I gave him an overview about Terezin, the arts and humanities as practiced by the prisoners, the mystery of the Verdi Requiem studied and performed 16 times, and that I created a concert drama which presents the story to audiences. "And you do this why?" he asked. I said, "Well, it's a story about the events, the prisoners, the arts in a concentration camp serving as nutrition, as fuel, as inspiration, and why they reached out to a musical composition steeped in the Catholic liturgy. It's a story not well known, and in our opinion, needs to be known." "And you do this where?" he asked. I explained about our forthcoming performance in Jerusalem and other places where we have performed it. "How did you find this story?" I briefly explained. "Are you a scholar?" he asked. Not officially," I responded. "When I came across the spirit of Terezin, how the prisoners responded to the worst of mankind with the best of mankind, I dropped everything, rethought my career, and began the search for answers, questions, and answers, and came to understand that I was going to devote my mind and heart to illuminating the Terezin legacy." "I see," he said. "So you are a messenger. We have many messengers here in Israel. I wish you well. Thank you for telling me all about this." He turned his chair to face his own table and became once again consumed by his laptop. "It's true, you know, I am not a scholar. I'm fairly well read, I think, but I seem to have become something of a messenger. And here's how. We were living in Minneapolis, and in the spring of 1994, getting ready to head to Aspen Music Festival for 10 weeks of teaching and performing. We were also getting ready to move to Portland, Oregon, where I had been invited by James the Priest to be his associate conductor on the conducting staff of the Oregon Symphony. It was a title called resident conductor. I was strolling in the uptown area of Minneapolis when I came upon a huge pyramid of used books on a large outdoor table in front of the Bryn Mawr bookstore. Well, that bookstore and that large table of books was unavoidable. You know what I mean. You can't avoid them either. I had to explore them, positive I would find a first edition of something very valuable for $3 or $5 just sitting there, rotting away. Actually, there was a book sticking out of the pile about halfway up from the bottom, and it was, beckoning to me. I remember looking at my watch to see if, when I pulled the book out of its home in the pile, if the pile of books collapsed, would there be time for me to pick them all up and reconstruct the pyramid? I had the time, and because I had the time, I gave it a try. I pulled the book out with great, there's an incredible German word. It's Überschallgeschwindigkeit, supersonic speed. That's how I pulled the book out. It popped out without an argument, leaving a hole from which it came intact, and nothing collapsed. The book was entitled Music at Terezin, and the contents indicated that this was a collection of mini bios about musician prisoners, names, music disciplines, what musical lives they had before the war, before becoming imprisoned, their musical contributions at Terezin, and if they survived, and few of them did, what sort of musical lives they had after the war. A few of them had rather important international careers. Most of the composers fell into obscurity. and it took a long time to find any of their music. Some of them are only now having a measure of recognition, and many of us are trying to give each of them a portion of the careers they never had and the careers they deserved. I opened to the body of this book and turned randomly to a short chapter entitled Rafael Schächter. I learned quickly that he was a conductor, pianist, who came from his home in Romania to study in Czechoslovakia at the conservatory in Brno, and he was a highly recognized and successful student. After graduation, he went to Prague, got a job with a small opera company, the Burian Opera Company, and was seen by the larger companies as gifted and en route to a conducting career in opera. War broke out, and his opportunities, because he was Jewish, were more and more limited, and soon they were curtailed. But the major shock of this short chapter about Schächter was found in the last few sentences, which simply said that he, Schächter, put together a volunteer choir of 150 singers, mostly amateurs, and taught them by rote the Requiem Mass composed by the famed Italian composer Giuseppe Verdi. By rote, because there was only one score in Terezin, the one brought in by Schächter, which was used by the pianist. This is a 90-minute composition for full chorus, 4 vocal soloists, and orchestra, or in this case, piano accompaniment. I read these sentences many times, and the effect over and over was one of disbelief. I know as a conductor what it takes to create performances of the Verdi Requiem under optimum conditions. How difficult each part is to sing under ideal circumstances, balances, choral color, rhythmic precision, diction, and in this case, learning the Latin, unknown to virtually every member of that choir. And this choir ate nothing nutritious, slept on wood, had no regimen of basic hygiene, and were all slave laborers from 10 to 12 hours daily for 8 days until receiving a half day off. And the demand on singers to learn, rehearse, and perform this composition, the demand was unimaginable. So many questions. Why did he choose a work steeped in the Catholic liturgy? To teach, rehearse, and perform in a prison where everyone was Jewish. More to the point, did it actually happen that he selected the Verdi score and taught it and performed it? Surely there would have been opposition from so many Orthodox Jews, so many rabbis in the camp. How did he get away with it? Why would he want to? First, I had to be sure that these performances somehow did happen. I was not just concerned about my own integrity. If this book was an error, the book that I held in my hand, it would open the door for the revisionists and the Holocaust deniers to make all sorts of accusations about many dimensions of the Holocaust. So step 1, prove that the Verdi performances did or did not take place. And at this moment of revelation, we moved to Portland, Oregon. Little did I know that this was going to help, not hinder, my investigation. Little did I know that the book I had stumbled upon was already changing my career, my life vision, and its path. Within a few days of arriving in Portland, I received a telephone call from Dr. Faith Gabelnick, president of Pacific University in that area. Evidently, she and the president of the Oregon Symphony Association had a conversation about encouraging me to form a collaborative relationship between the two institutions. I was so pleased because the one negative splinter about leaving Minneapolis was leaving a major university where I had just been granted a full professorship with tenure after only 2 years on the faculty. But a chance to work daily with a wonderful conductor and my closest friend, James the Priest, and create new concert programs was too important to pass over. Pacific University wanted me to lecture once a week in a class entitled Music, Every Possible Dimension, and to organize 2 organ symphony concerts per year on campus. I was delighted, and I accepted. Dr. Gabelnick told me that she understood I was entering the corridor of Holocaust studies, specifically in music and specifically related to Terezin. The president of the Oregon Symphony must have tipped her off. She said that there were 2 Holocaust scholars on campus, and she had arranged that they join us for lunch. A most thoughtful and welcome gesture. I met Professors Marsh Lee and Mike Steele, and our conversation was enormously fruitful. How can I prove that the Verdi project, as conceived by Rafael Schächter, actually happened? I had to answer this question before moving on to the why and the how, and did the Nazis permit these performances, and was Terezin a Nazi showplace, or what? Thanks to the ingenuity of these 2 guys, Professors Lee and Steele, I made progress online through a Holocaust website where I placed an appeal for Terezin chorus members, Requiem audience members, family or friends of Terezin prisoners who knew about the lectures, the drama, or musical performances, and especially anyone who had first-hand experience regarding the 16 Verdi Requiem performances. In a few weeks, responses led me to Schächter's niece in Jerusalem and her mother living in Haifa. That would be Schächter's sister. I went to see them, and they led me to Edgar and Hannah Kraza near Boston. Edgar was a roommate of Rafael Schächter and sang in all 16 performances. And they led me to Marianka Zedikov-May, who just turned 98 last week. And she was also a member of the choir. Eva and Jan Rocek, Vera Schiff, Zdenka Fantlova, and Felix Kolmar, who turned 99 just a few days ago, all of whom possessed invaluable first-hand memories of life tribulations, ill health, deportations, and importations, rehearsals, expressions of opposition to performing the Verdi Requiem, and even the command performance for the International Red Cross, an organization at that time which was compliant with the Nazis. For this, their last performance, they appeared with about 60 performers, 60 singers, down from 150 with whom Schächter had begun. These survivors also told me that prior to their arrival at Ghetto concentration camp, none of them knew anything about Terezin, nothing about its location or its history. As I spoke further with them and did research, I learned that Schächter was deported to Terezin toward the end of 1941, along with thousands of Czech Jews from all over the country, along with Jews from parts of Poland, the south of Germany, and even Jews from Denmark. By the time Terezin was liberated, approximately 160,000 prisoners had gone through Terezin, often as many as 60,000 incarcerated at any one time in a town built for 7,000 inhabitants in 1780. About 38,000 were murdered in Terezin through malnutrition and disease. Let me stop here for a second. Malnutrition and disease. If you have the capacity to assist people and to gain control and defeat malnutrition and disease, and you don't do it, that's murder. That's why I say they were murdered in Terezin. They just didn't merely die in Terezin. And approximately 88,000 were deported to extreme work camps and death camps, mostly Auschwitz-Birkenau. About 15,000 children were among those who were transported out of Terezin. fewer than 300 survived. Remarkably, in time, an enormous cultural community emerged without any formal initiation or plan or organization. One of the most informative conversations I had took place with a survivor whom I met some years after the premiere of Defiant Requiem. He was a prisoner at Terezin, but not a singer. He was in the audience, he told me, for 3 performances of the Requiem. He came to the first performance to hear his good friend Karel Berman, the bass soloist in the Verdi performances. They knew each other from the agricultural concentration camp of Lipa, where they worked together in the fields. I asked him what brought him back to the additional performances. It was the harmony, he said, but he clarified, not that kind of harmony, not Verdi's harmony. It was the environment of harmony, not musical harmony, not Verdi's score, but the demeanor on stage as being harmonious. I asked him to clarify. He said they all lived in terror, chaos, insanity. No order, no law. People were shot without any reason other than what a Nazi soldier thought was a good idea, a good enough reason. Filth, disease, hunger, strenuous work. But on stage, he saw a man who described the music through the art of expressive physical gestures. And all those people, a chorus of 150 volunteer singers, all responded. He discovered that there was a relationship between the visual gestures which described the quality of sound and what he heard. It took 3 performances for him to understand what he fully experienced, he and the audience. I became obsessed with these observations to the point where I actually wrote a one-act drama that goes into the controversy of performing the Verdi Requiem and the attitude of the Council of Jewish Elders, which had as membership some very, very distinguished people, and the attitude they had towards Schächter's decision to teach, rehearse, and perform this monumental score. As you can imagine, it was a negative, highly negative attitude that they had. The meeting between Schächter and the council did take place. That is documented. But what we don't know is the specifics of the confrontation. Some of what I learned about this confrontation came from Edgar Krause and Marianka May because they were in the chorus the evening that Schächter came to the chorus and said, "They want me to discontinue doing the Requiem. I'm going ahead. If you wish not to, I'll understand. There's the door." They all stayed. The drama itself falls under the category, my drama, of speculative history. Can't be anything else. Here is a bit of overview of the musical richness at Terezin by a very prominent participant, Terezin prisoner, pianist, composer, and conductor, Gideone Klein. My estimation, if Gideone Klein had lived, he would have been the Leonard Bernstein of Central Europe, or perhaps Bernstein would have been the Gideone Klein of America. Here's the quote from Gideone Klein. "When going through the weekly music program published by the Free Time Schedule, the Freizeitgestaltung, people who have never lived here would be surprised and partly astonished by the quantity of music performed here." He was referring to the many weekly concerts, including new music, recitals, several operas in rotation, choral works, chamber music, and even a jazz band entitled the Ghetto Swingers. It was run by a man named Martin Roman, who had a great career after the war as a dance band musician. And was the subject of an autobiography by the drummer of that band just about a year and a half or 2 years ago by the name of Coco Schumann. He did not mention Klein. He did not mention the lectures. 2,400 lectures presented by 530 fellow prisoners over 3 years on every imaginable topic. 300 lectures on literature alone. In the opinion of Klein, this put Terezin's musical and cultural life on an equal footing with the musical offerings in any occupied European city. But less than 2 months before he was deported to the camp where he would be murdered, Klein followed up with a harsh assessment of the quality of the cultural life at Terezin. Quote, "A salient feature of Terezin's musical life is the limited artistic resources that do not allow orchestral works to be performed in their original version, and a dire shortage of genuine professional musicians. Actually, in the other branches of culture and the arts, the situation is even more difficult. Certain features of amateurism, although essential for keeping up Terezin's cultural life, nonetheless call for critical assessment and for coming to terms with this reality." I think our documentary film, Defiant Requiem, may I recommend this to you? Verdi at Terezin was nominated for 2 Emmy Awards, if I may say, and has been seen several times over various networks around the world, PBS, BBC4, French National Television, Brazil, so forth and so on. We're very proud of that. I would like to tell you now about what I considered to be the most hopeful of organizations and events in Terezin. It's called the New Music Studio. Can you imagine new music in a concentration camp? I think we too easily accept that composing music in a concentration camp seems on the surface not only unnecessary, but irrational, except that to the composers, it was necessary and it was rational. These composers saw and heard and experienced, and once they got over the shock of being thrown into prison, they had to let us know all about it. I know that some of you, as we go through these wonderful compositions, will wonder why we don't know these pieces. Well, for a long time, we didn't have the music, and it takes advocates to champion and to illuminate these compositions on formal concerts. As our dear friend and colleague, Philip Silver, pianist, has said, and these become words that we have begun to live by, now that we have this music, we must play it, or it would be the equivalent of murdering these people a second time, and we cannot allow that to happen. Something that has been asked very, very often, and that is the question I just asked. Why new music in a concentration camp? New music studio. If it were Chicago or Prague or London or Los Angeles, it's understandable, quite understandable. But in a concentration camp, let me read to you his response to that question. Many may ask, why is there new music? Are there not enough old masterpieces to delight the music lover? But a secret law forces productive people to create. May I please repeat that last sentence for you? But a secret law forces productive people to create. In any case, the wonderful fabric of Western musical development must not rest. The generations to come also want their music, theirs, not ours. Goethe said, the appeal to posterity arises from the pure, vivid feeling that there is something imperishable which will enjoy the applause of the majority. May I repeat Goethe's sentence for you, please? The appeal to posterity arises from the pure, vivid feeling that there is something imperishable which will enjoy the applause of the majority. Now, I would like to introduce you to some of the music from Terezin. Otherwise, we are speaking rather abstractly. So here are some compositions I would like you to know something about. First of all, it occurred to me that as I was researching, that every composition I have come across seems to be able to fit into a category, almost like chapters in a book. And every composition I have found so far, come across so far, performed, seems to fit into one of these 9 categories. And here they are. Longing. Now, the very first song that you heard, Anne Quintero singing the music of Ilse Weber, I Wander Through Theresienstadt, I think that this is longing for home. Second, hope. Thirdly, the broken heart. Fourth, the messenger. More about that later. Fifth, pure entertainment. Sixth, eyewitness. More about that in a moment. Seventh, censorship. There wasn't much censorship, but there was some significant censorship by the Council of Elders. 8, fate. And 9, in memoriam. Let's listen now to some music by Victor Ullmann, probably the most prominent, the best known composer in the camp. Here is a segment of his 7th piano sonata, written for Terezin pianist, prisoner pianist, Edith Steiner Krauss. This is a short section from the 5th movement of that sonata. This is under the heading of messenger. Why? Because there are 3 well-known snippets of music inserted into this music. One is a song by Yehuda Sharet called Rachel. The second by Johann Sebastian Bach, a Lutheran hymn, Now Thank We All Our God. And thirdly, the ancient Hussite warrior song, a hymn. That one was used, that hymn has been used by Smetana and 20th century Czech American Karel Husa and many other composers. That simply goes ba ba bam bam bim bam bam. That's the warrior hymn. The Lutheran hymn, Now Thank We All Our God. And Rachel, da da dee da da dee da. You'll hear that in the very beginning. Why use these 3 pieces, each with a different meaning, each seeming to be in collision with the other 2, if there were no message surrounding the usage of those 3? It's not documented, and all we can do is speculate. Let's listen to the fugue from the 5th movement of the 7th piano sonata, starting right away with Rachel, and then the insertion of the hymn and the Hussite warrior song. Here is that excerpt. played by Philip Silver, the fifth movement of the seventh piano sonata, composed for Edith Steiner Krauss, who had to learn it and rehearse it while a prisoner in the camp, sharing the piano with so many other musicians. Here's a very interesting composition by a composer named Robert Dauber. He was a cellist, but he wrote this piece for violin and piano. It's a serenade, and it falls under the heading of music for pure entertainment. This is hotel music. This is the sort of thing you go into a tea room and you would expect a violinist and pianist, perhaps a couple of musicians who stroll to play music like this. Dauber was not known as a composer. It looks as though this is the only composition we have of his that came from Terezin. So let's listen to Robert Dauber's violin and piano serenade, played by Herbert Greenberg and Philip Silver, under the heading of Music for Pure Entertainment. The next composition I'd like you to hear is composed by Karel Berman. Now, Berman was a major talent. First of all, he was the bass singer for all 16 performances of the Verdi Requiem. And he survived the war. He survived Terezin, Auschwitz, and he became a sought-after soloist and ensemble singer throughout the world. Boris Godunov and Beethoven Ninth Symphony, anything with a big bass role, he was one of the most prominent people in Europe, and his career was extraordinary. But he was also a fine pianist, conductor, and composer. So he was 4 for 4 in everything that he tried to accomplish in music. This is a composition I would place in the category of Eyewitness. This is the second movement from a piece he wrote in Terezin called the Terezin Suite. The second movement was a rather despondent short movement, and he changed the title of it after the war to become this following title. It was Auschwitz Corpse Factory. And we'd like to play this for you now. This is Philip Silver, who is doing now the second movement from the Terezin Suite by Karel Berman, Auschwitz Corpse Factory. In Terezin, there were some of Europe's most leading cabaret artists, very famous people. We're going to play for you now and have it sung, a composition from the cabaret studio at Terezin. I'd put this one under the heading of fate. Those cabaret artists were always so sarcastic and thinking about the life ahead. Here's a piece by Martin Roman. It's called Carousel. Has nothing to do with Rodgers and Hammerstein, but it does have to do with a circle of life. So it's a wonderful cabaret song, and it'll be sung for us by Ariana Zuckerman. If that last name is familiar to you, daughter of. So here we go.
Da wir kleine Kinder waren,
That was the music of Martin Roman Carousel, sung by Ariana Zuckerman. This next composition is rather remarkable. This is a film from 1944 in Terezin, when a ensemble of string musicians were told to perform a work by Pavel Haas called Etude for Strings. And the purpose of this was because they were making a film about Terezin, about the benevolence of the Nazis that they were going to send all over the world. And so this was an example of the arts that they wanted to include. Interestingly enough, the film was 75 minutes long, and they never showed it because by that time, in late summer 1944, so much of Germany was bombed out that this film would have shown the Jews in Terezin living better than the Germans. So they decided not to show this film. But nevertheless, we do have some excerpts from it, about 24 minutes of the 75-minute film. This is really worth your attention because some of the musicians that we've been speaking about are actually playing in this orchestra. The conductor is Karel Ančerl, who after the war became conductor of the Czech Philharmonic and ended his career as conductor of the Toronto Symphony, a superb conductor. So this is Etude for Strings by Pavel Haas, conducted by Karel Ančerl. And at the same time, at the end of this performance, if you look closely, you can see the composer, Haas, walk to the stage to shake the hand of the conductor. Okay, here we go.
In einem Konzert wird ein Werk eines in Theresienstadt lebenden jüdischen Komponisten aufgeführt.
One more. I would love for you to hear this. It would be just as easy to stop now and go on to questions, but I would hate myself tomorrow if I did not play for you this magnificent song by a composer by the name of Carlo Talba. We don't really have any music of his other than this, although we are told that he wrote a lot of music in Terezin. Not much survived. We think just this one song. It comes under the heading of the broken heart, and it's called Jiddische Kind, the Jewish child. And it too is now sung by Ariana Zuckerman. Here's the music of Carlo Talba.
Du bist ein Kind,
To conclude, let me just read to you a very short review, a critique by Victor Ullmann, who was the self-designated music critic of all the performances. Why music criticism? Why music criticism in a concentration camp? Because he wanted everyone to know they will be judged and they must practice, rehearse, and be prepared to play and perform, sing at a high level. He wrote this critique on the performance of the Verdi Requiem, which is perhaps one of the singular great achievements of the arts community in Terezin. What unspeakable glory of melodic invention, what an inexhaustible abundance of forms, ensemble sets, skillfully placed choirs at dramatically exciting moments, wisely distributed highlights. All this Verdi has applied in so many operas and now has developed to the highest mastery. Yesterday's performance, it may seem right once again to emphasize Rafael Schächter, to whom Terezin musical life owes so much, whose stimulus gene and artistic activities have managed a performance of urban level. What a wonderful term. Any place that has a great musical society, he would think of as urban level. Schächter captures the spirit of the work with economical but evocative gestures. Why does everything sound glorious with Verdi, while with countless other masters, the human voice does not sound beautiful, but snaps like a fish on dry beach? I'm reading from here. Gratefully, we acknowledge the superb performance of Gideone Klein on piano. Well, there's just a brief overview over the musical life and the cultural life at Terezin. Thanks very much. I'll be very happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you very much, Maury. It was really fascinating and interesting. And if you have any questions, you can write it in the chat now, and we will ask them. And meanwhile, let me ask you about the future plans for the Requiem. It was performed by you here in Israel, I think twice, if I'm not mistaken. And last time it was in the Jerusalem Festival, the Israel Festival in Jerusalem a few years ago. And do you have any programs, any plans for the future with the Requiem?
Yes, yes, Tommy, just let me correct one little thing. We performed the Requiem here once, and then the second performance was what we call the Hours of Freedom, and that was the music from the new music studio. We did that in Jerusalem just a couple of years ago, so we've done both of them. We had a number of performances scheduled, but of course, as with all artistic events, COVID interjected a postponement. So right now we are recapturing our schedule. I'm happy to say we're going to Amsterdam, which was postponed. We'll be there in December, and we are now contacting all the concert sponsors. There were about 5 or 6 that we were to do last year, which were postponed. So we've got a lot to do. And in addition to that, we look forward to more performances of Hours of Freedom, which is the new music studio at Terezin.
Thank you very much, Maury. And those of you, I just say it again, those of you who would like to watch the movie, you will have in the chat the link. I think it's a wonderful movie. The project itself is something special, and the movie shows also the history and talks about Schächter and his special personality, and it gives a very wide view of life, especially music in Terezin, which is wonderful. Yeah. So I would like to thank you all for being with us. There's one comment here. I would like to know more about how the music notes. Let me read it. I would like to know, 1, more about how the music notes written in Therezin survived the war. And the second question is, today we can buy notes in a shop or copy it simply using copy machine. How did it work in Terezin? Because I suppose many copies were needed for the singers to study it for the rehearsal of Verdi Requiem. So
Let's start with that. There was only one score of the Verdi Requiem, and that was the one that Schächter brought with him, a piano vocal score. Everything else had to be taught by rote. So what he would do is he would go down to the basement, and he'd have the men come down one night, and he would teach them about 5 minutes of music, and he would just use repetition on an instrument called the harmonium. You had to press pedals, and it sounded something like a Baroque organ. And so that's how he did it. He would just do that. Then the next night, he'd bring down the women and teach them the same parts. Then he'd put it together, and slowly was able to piece it together. But most of the people didn't read music anyway. But if they did read music, there would be no way to copy it or to put it on a Xerox machine. I'm afraid that would be out of the question. About having manuscript paper and pencils and all of those things. I think you asked that, didn't you, about materials that they could use to create the music. All the composers brought with them manuscript paper, music paper, but most of that went very quickly. Then they had to improvise. Let's say if there's a notice up on a bulletin board that is outdated, and if you take it down and turn it over and it's blank on the other side, well, you've got yourself a piece of paper. And then there was a studio for people who were doing signs and things of this nature, and they were very helpful in sharpening pencils and making writing utensils available. They just had to improvise. They were just very creative people, and they were able to do that. But imagine how much music paper it would take to do that sonata that you heard, or the opera that was banned, the Kaiser from Atlantis, for 10, 12 instruments plus singers. So yeah, it was very, very difficult to find ways in which the music could be notated and shared.
thank you for this answer. And if there are more questions, you're invited to ask.
Here's someone up here, I think. Yes.
Mm-hmm. No.
Yes. Could you
Can you unmute yourself?
unmute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm Inga Auerbacher. You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. How are you, Ingrid?
Child survivor of Terezin.
Mm-hmm.
You explained a lot of things that I never knew about, believe it or not, because I was very young. And to me, it was more important to go to the garbage heap to find some potato peelings.
Yeah.
I mean, I was there between the age of 7 and 10. And I would love once to get in touch with you. I happen to be a chemist, but my hobby is music. I would like to share with you some things. In fact, I'm a songwriter. One of my songs was recently sung by a choir of 65 children at the United Nations. I'd like very much to get in touch with you privately, certainly.
I would love that. I would absolutely love
Thank
that.
you. I've been trying to get in touch with you for a long time because I heard about you. And I did see Brundibar. That was one of the other musical performances. I was not in it. I'm German born, so I didn't speak Czech. And also there was Little Glowworm, Glühwürmchen, I remember that. But of course, you know, out of those 15,000 children, almost nobody survived. And I just saw somebody, my dear friend Jackie Young, who was just a baby. Unfortunately, he survived too. I just saw a note. Hi, Jackie. So, yeah. That's
If you would be so kind, it's M Sidlin at
I
defiantrequiem.org.
looked you up, so yeah.
Now that I know your name, I will look forward to hearing from you.
Yes, and I will send you the piece when I spoke at the UN, and also the children singing "Who Am I?" I have a new one now, A World of Peace, which I would love the whole world to sing. It's already in Rwanda language too. But that was not my profession. I'm a writer as well, but I was a chemist in medical research and clinical work for 38 years.
I'm thrilled to know you. I'm privileged to know you. God bless you, and thank you for identifying yourself.
Wonderful work.
And I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So if there's anybody else who would like to ask or say something?
Jackie.
Okay. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you very much, Maury, for giving us this interesting lecture, and we hope to see you again in our next lectures. So good night, everybody.
It'll be my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Wonderful to be with you. Thank you. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you very much.